Chevre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today we're going to speak about a huge subject. And as usual, I believe it's very important to show the profundity of Chassidus, the broad ramifications, and the relevance. And the beauty of how something could be learnt without studying Chassidus. And even though it's beautiful, it's Torah, but it doesn't come at all to the profundity and the richness and the depth when we learn something in the light of Pnimius HaTorah, the inner dimension of Torah, etc. Today, we're going to talk about time, the concept of time, and something that affects us every single second, every single moment, for lack of a better word, of our existence. And it's the very fabric of life itself, time, space, the universe, etc. Before we begin, we'll start as usual with a prayer. And that's a pasuk from Tehillim. And the pasuk says, Go mi ro einecho, val sifrecho kulam yikosevu, yamam yutzaru, v'loi echad bahem. Which is translated, your eyes beheld my raw form. All future happenings are as if inscribed in your book, even those that will occur in days yet to be formed. To him, they, the past and future events, are one and the same. So over here, there's a whole discussion about Veloi, written as with a lamed and a vav, and Veloi with an aleph, which means Veloi unto him, and Veloi, and there is not, which we're not going to explain now, we're going to give one interpretation. And that is that the pasuk is a message to the person, that an instruction, like be careful. And the problem is that we have time exists, and the loy yomim yitzaru, God created days, time, and the loy with an aleph, the Alter Rebbe teaches up, the loy echad behem, and we didn't bring the echad, Hashem echad, we didn't reveal the oneness of Hashem in time. So to truly understand what this means, we'll talk about a very famous pasuk in this week's Parashat. This week's Parashat talks about the last three Makkos that Hashem through Moshe delivered to Egypt, and then right before they went out of Egypt, before they got the Torah, and the story of Kriyas Yamsuf and Parshas B'Shalach, and Matan Torah, Parshas Yisroi, Hashem gave them two commandments, the commandment of Kiddush HaChodesh, sanctifying the moon, and the new moon, and the Korban Pesach. So, in this week's Parsha, we have the mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Reish Chodashim Rishin Hu Lochem L'Chodshei Hashana. Hashem gives the Bnei Yisrael, the Yidden, the mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon, Kiddush HaChodesh. Now, I hope I'm going to do justice. There's a lot we have to talk about, and we'll just talk about a couple of layers. So over here, we have the commandment for all future generations that Bezdin, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, is given to man. Man decides when's Rosh Chodesh, and through that they make the leap year, and that aligns all the holidays should fall out at the right time of the year. And in general, what day of the month, what day of the week should be Tesvav, the 15th of Tishrei, of Nisan, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to elaborate now about the Jewish calendar, but you know what I mean. So, and this is what it means when we say, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael Ve'azmanim, He made the Jewish nation, and the Jewish nation, Mekadesh Yisrael, they are the ones, Bezdin, in our hands, the Jews, Lochem, have to sanctify the new moon when witnesses come, and then Bezdin decides it's Rosh Chodesh, then it's Rosh Chodesh. So, and also we say that now, HaChodesh Hazeh, which month? Nisan, becomes like the head of the year. So there's so many obvious questions here. First of all, what's the connection? Everything in Judaism is precise. Why is it that this mitzvah comes as the Jews are going out of Egypt? With the birth of the Jewish nation comes this mitzvah of sanctifying the idea of the new moon of birth. What's the significance? Also, everyone knows the famous Rashi, first Rashi in Torah, which says that the Torah should have started with HaChedesh Ezelachem, but we start with Bereshis. So obviously, even though that itself needs explanation, why in the end we start with Bereshis Bara Elokim, but the point that the Torah should have started with HaChedesh is understood, because if we look at the Torah as a law of books and commandments, so since as the Jewish nation, the first commandment was HaChedesh Ezelachem, the commandment of sanctification of the new moon, so that means that Ahava Minif Torah is Eichet Torah. It makes sense logically to say that the Torah should start with HaChedesh Ezelachem. Why? So what's so important of the mitzvah of HaChedesh Ezelachem that we actually say the Torah should have started like that? Why is it the first mitzvah coinciding with the birth of the Jewish nation and the Exodus, as if there's an intrinsic inner connection? And also, what does it mean in general? Why do we have to have this medrash that says Mishabachar HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yaakov U'Banav Kova B'Reish Chodesh Shel Geula? That until now, the first of the year was Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Tishrei, but now that we make the Jewish nation, we have Kova B'Reish Chodesh Shel Geula, a month of redemption, liberation, and freedom. And that's what it means. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Reish Chadashim. Now we're starting a new story, a new narrative. Your new year is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. What does this mean? What is this about? We're playing games? No, this is the new year. That's the new year. Mayune. There's a French New Year, Chinese New Year, English New Year. What's going on over here? So to understand all this, first let's talk about the simple level, just a bit, and then we'll go to the deeper level. So, number one, there's a concept over here that, according to many commentators, over here we're talking about, one interpretation is HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. We're talking about time and the fluctuations of time. And that's what lunar stands for, because it waxes and wanes. We see the difference of every single day. And what is time? Time means divisions. There's days, hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds, etc. And that's what the meaning over here is in a certain level. This idea of time, lachem. You should be the master of time. Today we have what's called time management. So that's another whole subject. We have people that they feel very harried, full of tension, stress. Today we like to say trauma. And there's deadlines, and they feel like that it's out of control. And the time controls them instead of the other way around. So here we say, no, the Eibishter gave us the ability. HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. You have the power to be the master of time. Time should serve you, not that you should serve time. And I believe it's connected to priorities. When a person's priorities are right, so then he knows how to elevate the time and use the time properly. But we'll leave that for another time. But I'm just talking about different levels and layers of what the pasuk is telling us. Now, the next, and there's a famous expression, the Zeit läuft, time is running, so there's a lot of pressure from time. There's also a famous expression we're going to get to later. We say, the Zeger is the größte Musazager. Time is the greatest preacher. In other words, you look at the clock, and you see the clock is running, the clock is ticking, so it's always standing and telling you, do something, get up, move it. So that's what it means when we say, the Zeger is the größte Musazager. But I want to take it much deeper. It's taka true, it's the größte Musazager, and we'll add to that later. But why is it the größte Musazager? Because there's so many layers to the concept of time. And now let's get to the Kassidic interpretation. But first, we'll add to this that the Rebbe in Tafshin Nun Beis, what I'm going to tell you now is a combination, first of all, of a Sikh of the Rebbe in Chelik Tezayin and Chelik Chavav, but also in Tafshin Nun Beis. Last year we heard Sikhs of the Rebbe until now. The Rebbe actually spoke about it 3 times. Noach, Vayishlach, and told us about this moon, the moon, and Kiddush Levana. And I don't know if the Rebbe ever spoke another time about focusing on the mitzvah of Kiddush Levana, what we do on Matzah Shabbos, Kiddush Levana, and how we should be careful about it. So I want to reiterate it over here now, that the Rebbe made very strong request that we should do it in the mitzvah Hidur, with joy, dressed in our best clothes, Motzei Shabbos. See Parshas Noach Nun Beis. So in Parshas Noach Nun Beis, he brings over there, but I'm combining this straight away with Toldis Nun Beis, and also a bit of a Yishlach. There's a Maimer Azal that says, Kol ha'mavorach al ha'chodesh bezmanoi, kilu makabel pnei Shechina. Whoever blesses the month at its right time, it's as if he receives the Shechina. And we even say it in the words, Ilu molu lizachu Yisrael al ha'hagbel pnei avim shebeshamayim, pamachas b'chodesh dayam. So, we say close encounter of the divine kind. You want to have a major close encounter of the divine kind? It's not when you're davening Shemines. Of course it is. Excuse me. It's not only when you're davening Shemines, at the ecstasy of prayer and spiritual attachment, or when you're learning Torah, delving, immersing yourself in the divine wisdom of Hashem. But guess what? When you go out of the shul and you say Kiddush Levana, Kiddush HaChodesh, you're encountering the divine Shechina. Implies that in a way this is the climax. This is the summit of the whole relationship and experiences with Hashem to a certain extent. So how can we explain it? And the answer is connected with the idea of the Jewish nation becoming a Jewish nation when they went out of Egypt. Now, there's 2 points I want to talk about now, but they go hand in hand. I'm going to start with a higher point, and then we'll get to the next point and how it's connected. You know what? I don't know. We'll start with the lower point. We say God desired a dwelling place down here below. We spoke about that many times. So that is the central theme of Judaism. As we mentioned last week, the statement of the Alter Rebbe based on the Maimer Azal, V'zeh kol ha'adam, v'sachlis b'riyosho yivrias kol ha'elamis, el yoinim v'sachtoinim li'yisleis barach direzeh b'tachtoinim. The totality of existence of the cosmos, spiritual realms, physical realms, everything is that God wanted a dwelling place down here below. Which means God wanted the absolute essence of God to come down into physical time and space. So it's like we spoke many times, transcendence of time and space that comes down into time and space. This paradox, this fusion of opposites. And that's what it means that God desired a dwelling place down here in this world will reveal how everything is God, even in the so-called constraints and confinement and limitations of time and space. We'll see total infinity and essence of God. This is the whole secret and beauty of Judaism. See Tanya chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 36. So if we talk about the world, this is something which those that study Chassidus know about it. The essential component of the world, in a certain sense, is time even more than space. Time and space are 2 of the essential components of physical reality, and maybe you could even say in a certain sense spiritual reality. And according to what's explained in Chassidus, and I heard from my masters, time is even more limited than space. I don't want to get into the explanation now. So in other words, if we break down Tachtoinim, and what the word Tachtoinim means, and we say God desired a dira, a dwelling place in Tachtoinim. What is the most basic component of Tachtoinim? And all of Tachtoinim is Zman, time. So therefore, now that we're talking about the birth of the Jewish nation, our mission, so what's the first mitzvah? What's the most basic component that tells us about all of Torah mitzvahs and what our mission is? Time. Because since time is the basic component of all of physical reality, of Tachtoinim, and of creation, so therefore, HaChodesh Hazeh, Lachem, what's your mission, Lachem? Your mission is to bring holiness, Kiddush, Levana, the sanctity of time, the sacredness of the Jewish calendar, of the Yomim Tovim. That's what your mission is. And that's why it was given to us now at the birth of the Jewish nation, because it tells us what is our mission. What's the whole idea of the Jewish people? Our job, our mission, our purpose of existence is Lasasli Yisbarach Dira Zeh B'Tachtonim. And time is the first and foremost mitzvah, the sanctity of time, that tells us what our mission is. To take it a step further, and that's the connection to Mishabachar HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yaakov V'Banav Kovel Am Chedesh Shel Geula. That's what it means to be Jewish. A Jewish person has a chelik elikam imal mamish, a yechida shebenefesh, a nitzutz boire that transcends time. That's the whole word. As we spoke many times, and as we just explained, in Welt, hechafa Welt. We have to be a part of the world, but apart. A-P-A-R-T has two words, and A-P-A-R-T as one word. Because we're apart, higher, beyond, and connected to the essence of Hashem that has no limits, therefore we can also be apart, being in the world. We could be a part of the world, yet apart. And this is what it means that the Jews are that we're chelik elikam imal mamish. In other words, there's parts of the Jews which we call chelik hanivur shebeneshama, our lower levels, our nefesh ruach neshama, the parts of our neshama that we say we understand Hashem, we have feelings for Hashem, our elements that are comparable, that are also by other creations. But then there's the essence of the Jew, the real chelik elikam imal mamish, which is like Hashem Himself, which has no limits. And that's what it means. There's the story of the world till Parshas Ve'era. But then we come to Parshas Ve'era and Boy and Yisroi and Beshalach, the revelation, like we spoke previously, the Yodu Ki Ani Avaya, Yudke Vavke. We're talking about God's infinity, and how now God in His infinity inserts and injects us, and He makes us His people, His wife, and He injects us with that spark of infinity that gives us this ability to bring infinity into the finite. So now we understand, what does it mean? Why we have to look at the new year starting from Chodesh Nisan, because this is the real beginning of the Jewish nation. The transcendental aspect, the infinity DNA. This is when it starts. Chodesh Nisan, Miloshen Nisan, miracles. The idea that there's no limits. God is not Mother Nature. God transcends it. God can't even be defined, etc., etc. And now we come to a deeper meaning to the word HaChodesh Hazeh. What does it mean, HaChodesh? Miloshen Eschatzus, creativity. A Yid is the only one who could do something which is totally beyond his nature, totally beyond his habits, totally beyond what fits your profile. How come we have such an ability? And as the Rebbe Rashab said, the Pshat in the words, Elikah, we're chelik elikah mimal mamish. We can connect the mimal, the highest of the high, and spirituality, and bring it down into the mamish, into the most tangible physical. And why is that? Because we come from the essence of God. Just like the essence of Hashem has no limits, and it could make the fusion of opposites and transcend the laws of physics, say whatever you want, so too it's within the possibility of every Yid. And that's what it means, HaChodesh Hazeh, this power of true creativity, being able to reinvent yourself, being able to live your way one way for 50 years and then overnight change completely, drastically. And some will say, it's impossible. How can a human being do it? The answer is a human being can't do it, but a Jew can do it. And why is that? Because he's a part of Hashem Himself. So this is the beauty of HaChodesh Hazeh. This ability of Achodesh is Chachas, Kechadoshim, Lochem, was given only over to Jews. Only a Yid has that koyach of his Chachos, because of his Chelik Elikam Imal Mamish. And therefore he also has the ability of Achodesh Hazeh, Lochem, to sanctify time. Which, by the way, I think we mentioned many of these things before. You know, there's an expression in English, we say, killing time. It's used an expression. According to Judaism, it literally is like that. Since time was created, and God is giving it life, so when you don't utilize it properly, you're actually taking something alive and killing it. And our mission is not only to keep it alive, but it's actually to sanctify it. We're taking the essential DNA, basic component of existence, and bringing something which is higher than limitations into limitations. Into the most limited thing, time, we bring limitlessness. And by the way, I'm just saying, I find it amazing, and I never heard anything like about this, is that in a way you could say that this is also a message about HaChodesh Hazeh, Lochem. HaChodesh means, this is the irony, the fusion, and the paradox. HaChodesh means it's Chachas. You have people, they're very creative. They're very exciting. But they have to know it's got to be connected to time, limits, you know? And that's the connection also over here. This idea that you have to take your creativity and make it also by the book, by the clock. The connection to Yud Shvat, by the way, I forgot to mention, I think before, that this coming Wednesday is Yud Shvat. And what we spoke about over here is connected to Yud Shvat in two ways. First of all, in the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer, in the original first, in the end of the first Maimer of Bosel Beganim Tov Shir, he brings this concept of Yomim Yitzoru V'loi Echad Behem, how we have to be so careful about time. And it's also connected to Yud Shvat as the day the Rebbe accepted the leadership. Because the Rebbe, I don't know if there's another human being that we saw the preciousness of time, another Yid, and the urgency, like we saw by the Rebbe. As is well known, the Rebbe never took a day off. All holy tzaddikim throughout the history of mankind, in the annals of Jewish history, I don't think it existed that there was a Rebbe or a tzaddik that never went off the reservation for a day or two, like from the office. In Russia, it was called Dacha. And I think there was a place called Marienbad. All the Gedolei Yisrael, went there during summer months, etc., so to speak. But the Rebbe, even when he had his heart attack, as is known in Tafshin Lamed Ches, he stayed in his office. Why? Because time is of the essence. And as the Rebbe himself explained in the Maimer of Litir Meshakela, Tafshin Yud Beis, this idea, we'll have to leave it for another time, how the Rebbe saw every single second, if it wasn't channeled and used properly, he looked at himself and he saw it as somebody who would be negligent on his mission. That's how he viewed himself. So we have to learn from this. And this is the lesson from this week's Parasha. Before we finish, I would like to say two anecdotes. One is a famous anecdote called The Clock on the Tower. It's a famous one. There was a clock that was mounted high up on the tallest building in the town. And like it was the town, the clock for the whole town. So whenever somebody wanted to see the time, they would look up at the clock to see what time it was. That's how everyone kept time. And if there was any inconsistency between the watch that they had in their hand and what it said on the clock, they would fix their watch. Anyways, times change, times are changing. And there were people that came along at a later date and they started complaining, the discontents. The clock is too high. Every time we have to look at the clock, we have to pick up our head. It's a pain in the neck. And what if the clock is wrong? It's so high up, it's going to be so hard to fix it. You know what? We should lower the clock. So they called a major meeting. There was a vote in the Senate, in the Parliament, in the town hall, and they decided to lower the clock. Anyways, they lowered the clock, and a funny thing happened. What happened was that when people started seeing a discrepancy between their watch and the clock, they changed the clock. As the famous flaw of human nature is, I'm right. So when they saw their watch and they saw the clock, they decided their watch was right and the clock was wrong. And guess what? It happened all the time, because so many times people were walking, they checked their watch, and their watch was different than what was in the clock. So they started changing the clock. Everyone was fiddling the clock. They fiddled with the clock so much the clock broke. So this is a famous story, and the lessons are many. I guess we could say the clock means the anchor. There are certain things that are fixed, that are essence. That's our Torah. We have to fix ourselves according to the Torah. Time has to be fixed according to the eternal, infinite principles of Hashem Himself. We can't play around with it, and only then it will work. Once we lower it, once we dilute it, once we fit it to each and every one of our individualistic idiosyncrasies and eccentricities, it gets broken. And I guess the overall message is, today I Googled the Zege is a Musazager, that the clock is the best of Musazager, the best moral, preacher, teacher. So when I Googled it, an amazing thing happened. I saw somewhere where somebody quoted somebody who went into the Friedrich Rebbe with his father, and the Friedrich Rebbe asked his father what he does for a living, and he said he's a Zegemacher, a clockmaker, a watchmaker. And then the Friedrich Rebbe told him, a Zege is a Stimmer Musser Zager. A clock is a quiet Musser Zager, a silent Musser Zager. Reden retten nicht. He doesn't speak. Aber sagen sagt Asach. He doesn't speak, but he has very much what to say. So I was so happy to hear that word, because it taught me another lesson. Sometimes, like we have the expression, the sounds of silence. Sometimes you can have an effect in a person without screaming, without making a lot of noise, without even speaking to him. Just be a role model the way you're meant to be. And in your silence, you could have the most powerful impact, the most powerful impression. So I guess the lesson is a very, very obvious lesson. We have to think about all these things we spoke about today. Time after time, we ignore time. So once and for all, it's already time that we listened to the timeless messages of time. And the Rebbe will tell him that if we elevate time properly and take the message of Yitzhak, which the Rebbe said that we are the first generation of redemption and the last generation of exile, the mission is on. And it's urgent. And we have to utilize our time to the best. If we do this all properly, the Eibishter will help. That will be the Geula Mitzvah Shleima. Lahamshech es Hashchina do lamata be'aretz. Take it from Yad Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.